Affairs Council of Atlanta. I hope everybody's at the right place. Our program today is Defund the Police, a political mistake. Our guests are Ambassador Luis Moreno and Thaddeus Johnson. Luis Moreno is a retired career Foreign Service officer, former U.S. ambassador to Jamaica. Ambassador Moreno spent much of his career training foreign police forces in, I'm sure I'm going to leave out some places, Luis, in Peru, Colombia, Haiti, Iraq. He's also, aren't you on the board of the World Affairs Council of San Antonio?
Yes, I am. Yes, I am.
Okay, so our sister World Affairs Council. So thank you very much. Thaddeus Johnson is a former Memphis police officer, a senior fellow at the Council on Criminal Justice, and a professor of criminology and criminal justice at the Andrew Young School of Policy Studies at Georgia State University. You must have the longest business card in the world. I hope I got all that right. Thank you so much, Thaddeus, for being here with us today. And I forgot, you're also a dual national U.S. Jamaican citizen. So while we were talking earlier, we just discovered a connection, a Jamaica connection between you and Ambassador Moreno. Today's program is brought to you by the individual and corporate members of the World Affairs Council, and I hope if you're not a member, you soon will be. Please join. On the bottom of your screen, you'll see a Q&A function. And if so, put your cursor on it, click on it, and send the questions to me, because they all will come to me the way this system is set up. And then I'm going to ask Ambassador Moreno and soon to be Dr. Johnson the questions in about 25 minutes, but we're just going to have a discussion first to get everything going. Thaddeus, I have never heard of defund the police until last week. Is that a thing people have been talking about for a while? Is it just a slogan that demonstrators come up with? What is defund the police? And what does it really mean?
There are rumors and rumbles of this after Michael Brown in 2014 and during those summers when we had Tamir Rice. They were talking about possibly defunding the police. We actually had one police department, major police department in our nation, Camden Police Department, to actually not disband or disfund, but re-envision their police department. And so right now it's a little bit difficult to understand what it really means, because some people will say defund the police means to just simply reallocate money from policing to social services. On the same talk show I was watching the other night, someone said, no, we really mean to abolish the police. So I think a big issue right now is that you really don't have a real working definition. You have so many talking heads giving definitions and opinions, but not really sure what defund means. But what I take it is defund the police means to reallocate sources and refunds from and financial resources from police departments and allocate them to other places. When we start talking about dismantling or disbanding the police, that's when I think it's more about the abolishment, and I'm not sure what the end game is for that.
Okay, good. That was my next question. You've already answered it. Ambassador Moreno, why were you working so hard throughout your career to train foreign police forces? What's in it for U.S. taxpayers? Why are we paying to train police forces around the world?
Well, Charles, there's a good answer to that. We've traditionally have, as you know, we do things in our own interest as well as stability around the world. In Latin America, where we train police forces, I have to say many of the police forces that we trained were militarized type of polices, like Colombia, like Peru. In Haiti, we actually dismantled the entire security apparatus, the armed forces of Haiti, and replaced it with the national police. So there's a experience I had with, completely eliminating the security force and building a new structure. That had mixed results. Again, corruption plays a major role in it. Sure. I think the problem we have with the whole defund the police slogan is that it's become now kind of partisan and it's become divisive. And I think that it's obvious from the recent events how endemic police brutality can be, how there are injustices, how there's a systemic problem that has to be addressed. I think our biggest challenge, as I look at it from an international point of view, some of these things, by the way, would be considered human rights abuses. If I was a foreign diplomat stationed in the U.S., I'd say that, the the U.S. police departments have a pattern of discriminatory human rights abuses. At any rate, we have
that's why we write human rights reports
exactly
in other countries instead of them writing it on us.
Exactly. The problem is we have 18,000 police forces, different police forces, a hodgepodge of metropolitan police, county police, sheriffs, constables, state police. And that makes it very, very difficult. You can't defund the police, because what are you going to have? 18,000 different defundings? You need a rebooting of the police, a restarting of the police. And for me, one thing we would do overseas, Charles, is a kind of standardized training. In other words, different police forces, you have to have a certain standard of training in crowd control, in arrest techniques, in investigative techniques, in recruitment, in vetting. You have to have a database of who the bad guys are, because here in the States, there's not a national database where a guy can get kicked out for being and then go move 2 counties over and be reinstated as a police officer. So you need better recruitment. You need better rules as far as lethal force, crowd control, but it has to be standardized. It can't be somewhere in Oxford, Mississippi, and then New York City and have 2 different sets of rules. And there has to be accountability. And undoubtedly, police unions have become, I know Dr. Johnson was making reference, I think, to Camden, New Jersey, perhaps, when he talked about kind of starting over from the beginning. They did, but they ended up hiring twice as many officers as they had previously. But they
so let's go there. Let's let Thaddeus talk about that. So what actually happened in Camden?
Oh, that's a great point, Luis. Great point. So what happened in Camden was this, and this is some of the things we have to consider. Basically, they were there one day, they cut the lights off, and the police chief put a new uniform on, and it was Camden County Police, right? They hired almost half of their old officers back, but what they did do, they hired 100 civilians to assist these officers in the communities. They tended to focus on community policing. They got more involved with interactions. That's a point I'll get back to with community policing, because community policing will only be as effective as the training and the reward structure that we do to provide them and incentivize them to do that, as opposed to arrest, citation, and things of the sorts. The issue is this, though. A lot of the citizens weren't necessarily happy. Some of the citizens said that before the police department dismantled, Camden is a majority Black city. When the county took over, guess what? The police department didn't reflect the community anymore. And is it a big deal? I think it is. Does it have an impact on crime? Research doesn't tell. But I think it's important that the police look like their community. And that's a big issue that they've had with it. Also, they're paying the police less. They brought them on for less pay. And so there are some things that we have to really take from that. I actually think we should invest in police salaries to bring on the people that we want to bring on. If we want to bring on people with a social work background, we're going to have to pay them. If we want to bring people on that's college educated, people with master's degrees to be leaders, we're going to have to train them, we're going to have to pay them. And so that's one thing I didn't hear about with Camden, was them actually changing their incentive structure, their reward structure. How are they going to keep morale up with lower pay, with less opportunities for advancement? So these are all the things that we have to consider beyond the emotion of the moment. Being emotional has gotten us in trouble before. Look at 1994 Crime Act. We wanted to fight crime.
I'm going to throw this up to both of you. I mean, why do so many people feel abused by the people whom we hire to protect and serve?
Well,
what's going on there? What we've seen over the past 2 weeks is that certainly in the African American community, there's a sense that these people are an occupying force, not us. You're a police officer in Memphis. You grew up in Memphis. I mean, if anybody should reflect Memphis, it would be you. I mean, so what's going on?
So this is the thing. So when we're talking about reform, I like history, right?
Right.
The one authentically American brand of policing was slave patrols in the South, right? When the Constitution was written about all men are created equal, they weren't talking about us, right? And so all that historical context, we just can't ignore it. Think about the Jim Crow laws. And for Black people, police have been the heavy hand of that oppressive state, regardless of the actions of the individual officer. So even as an officer who's Black coming to the community, I already have the card stacked against me, because the community looks at me as I don't want to throw the term like the Uncle Tomism out there, but that's how I can really feel as a police officer. as I'm in a uniform driving home through a black neighborhood and I see a police officer have someone pulled over, I'm like, why are they bothering those good black people? So I call it a paradoxical reality that I walked in, and I see police officers who look like me on the front lines of riots, and they almost have tears in their eyes because I know they're torn. And that kind of goes to the places that the reason why black people feel that way, because we have been dealt the short end of the stick when it comes to policing, but also it's the historical context that we can't get over. We have these dinner time conversations all the time. My mother told me coming up, be in the house before midnight, if a police officer says something, show your hands. Like, but I'm sure that people who don't look like me, they're not having those conversations. So it's those conversations, it's the history, and it's actually seeing police officers stop us. Or look, I've been on the other end of the stick, and that's why I think I approach policing in the way that I did, because I've been on the end of it. I understand how to be railroad, talk about plea bargains and all those things, to be arrested for something and not know your rights. Like, so that's the story of many Black Americans, and if not their family members. So that really talks about the depths of it. Again, this is a system that wasn't, where our very image, our very existence was considered criminal from the origins. And so those things run deep.
Luis, you grew up in Staten Island, right? Does the Latino community feel the same way about the police? Latino community in New York?
Dr. Johnson mentioned something about history and liking history. There was a guy named Tony Bauza who was the chief of the New York City Transit Police. He was born in Spain, and he's the first guy I heard, and this was in the mid-70s. He talked about how the police are looked on as an army of occupation in minority neighborhoods by the minorities themselves. I found that absolutely fascinating. I went to see him speak, you know, being a Latino, I'm a Latino, I identify the guy. This guy, he eventually went, ironically, to Minneapolis, where he was hired as police chief, and he caused a lot of angst. He was not liked very much by the rank and file, but he stayed 9 years. One of his big problems was his wife was constantly being arrested at anti-nuclear demonstrations. But yes, for the Hispanic population as well, it's really an issue. Here I'm living in San Antonio, Texas. We had a case of a young Hispanic man who was very similar circumstances. So yes, I think that exists as well, and it's just an overall problem that has to be dealt with in a systemic manner. It has to be done nationwide, and there has to be, for me, like I said, standard training precepts, and we have to recruit well. And like you said, Dr. Johnson, you have to pay. You know, you have to get guys with at least an associate's degree, and you have to put emphasis on de-escalation rather than force. So you have to be trained in crisis management and mediation and all those things. And that's defunding the police is not going to do that. Like you said, Dr. Johnson, it's going to cost money, like it did in Camden.
Yeah. So right before we started talking, my brother sent me an article from GQ, which I didn't get to read the whole thing, but it's an interview with a female police officer from Minneapolis. And she was talking about the culture within the police force and how hard it was. And that, first of all, there's an us versus them mentality towards the population. And that there's, that we don't call out our own is the unofficial motto of at least the Minneapolis police, that a policeman doesn't testify against another policeman. How big of an issue is that? How do you change, I mean, cultural change, whether you're talking about a business, you're talking about a government agency, you're talking about police, there's nothing harder to change than corporate culture.
If you don't mind me jumping in, let me say this. There's two things that we tend to forgotten on both sides. One, that police officers are our neighbors. They're our fathers, our sisters, our brothers, our mothers, that they're part of the community. And police have forgotten that they're part of the community as well, right? With all the media headlines, with the acrimony that's going on right now, it has to be hard to be a police officer. Imagine, particularly if you're a Black officer, you have a uniform on and everything you represent is years of oppression. No matter, it's the one job you have to defend what you do, right? If you're a lawyer, if you're a doctor or something, right, a medical doctor, you don't have to explain or justify what you do. In law enforcement, you do. And so that's one thing. We have to remember we're all part of the same community. there are citizens in uniform. And secondly, this is a job, right? This is not, police officers are not some benevolent beings and we just want to go out and devote our lives to public safety. No, we have bills. We have families that we want to take care of. And so if we're going to change the culture, we have to look at it as not this benevolent public service. This is the actual industry, and pull from these theories, these organizational theories. We need to look at the reward structures, how we train them. If the training continues to perpetuate these old traditional cultures, they tell these war stories. I came out of the academy to Miami Vice every day. I got most of my pleasure from, real quickly, a quick story. Most of my pleasure for, I changed a tire for an old lady one time, a young officer. It was raining. She could be my mom, my grandma, anyone. Got back to turn my activity log in, and my commander was like, "What the hell are you doing? We don't pay you to change tires. We pay you to write tickets and lock people up." And I'm like, but I thought this is an important part of the police job. So what if you rewarded officers for doing those types of things? Rewarded officers for not getting in trouble. Rewarded officers being innovative and finding other ways inside arrest. To me, arrest is a failure of society because we couldn't prevent it. And so this thing is so much bigger than policing, but to change that culture of policing, to change who recruit. I recruit them. We need to get more minorities and women in there. We need to be able to willing to go national recruitment, bring people in to get them in these communities. I don't care if you're in Boise, Idaho, you can't tell me that you couldn't benefit from having a member of the LGBTQ community or having a Black person on the police force to diversify. You have to break up the culture that's traditionally white and uneducated and bring in educated people of different backgrounds, pay them, train them, and also reward them for the job we want them to do. We can't say we want to do community policing, but we want to reward them for locking people up. That's not going to work. And the last thing, the use of force tends to happen in proactive police situations. And so if I'm forced to go out there and to lock people up, write tickets, and that's the tenor of the situation, the relationships between Black people and these communities and the culture will continue to be strained. So we need to look at what we envision policing as, how we reward them and who do we want, and how do we keep them happy and satisfied. And I won't even start talking about mental health and all these things. We need to invest in the police mental health. They're working overtime, right? I was a bouncer working 6-7 days a week after my shift. Police officers are doing, they're working overtime. You can't make good decisions if you running on 6 hours of sleep, particularly in that capacity. So we need to take care of our officers. And it sounds bad, it may be unpopular to have that level of compassion right now, but these are our community members that need our help at a vast number, record number of suicides. My police officers last year, something is really going on. You're involved in use of force, you don't get a debriefing. You go out there and involved in shooting, we'll sit you on the desk, suspend you, you go back out there. You haven't healed psychologically. And so these things have to take place if we really want to change the culture. Take care of our people, pay them, incentivize them, and invest in them for the jobs we want them to do.
Luis, let me ask you, I mean, when you train police abroad, when you disbanded the Haitian police and created a new police, I'm guessing that what that is just enumerated are exactly the principles that you were basing it on, right? How did it work? How successful were you in changing the police in Colombia or Haiti or Iraq? How did you bring in, I assume you bring in police trainers from the US, who you bring in the best people, not the worst people. How does it work when you reboot a police force?
Well, the transition period is key, but the most key thing, let me go back to something Dr. Johnson made reference to. I think the most compelling image that I've seen over the past couple of weeks, it didn't involve a policeman, it involved a young National Guardsman from the DC National Guard. And there was a close-up of his face. And he was on the front line against protesters. And they were saying, "I'm Black and I'm proud." And you could see him voicing that at the same time. So, you know, that comment that you made about community and being part of it, it's key. Leadership is key. If you look at Art Acevedo, a police boss in Houston, Texas, he's just been absolutely magnificent. So we tried to find and recruit, in the case of Haiti, where we were disarticulating the armed forces, because there was no police force. There was the army that was used by the Duvaliers to just repress the population beyond belief. We wanted to bring in the best community police chiefs. We brought in chiefs from all over the world that were highly vetted by us to try to come, and we started a police academy. But when we went to every single barracks, military barracks, we did tremendous investigation and vetting on people. So we had 3 lists, and we lined up all the Army guys. Some guys were tremendous human rights violators, and they were arrested by the ministry people. We had guys who, okay, here's the salary you're owed, see you later. Then there was a third category of guys who we had vetted. He said, hey, you guys are pretty good. You have a good reputation in the community. You have a clean record according to the human rights NGOs. You guys can be you can join the transitional police, because you need a transitional police. You need something in between the bad and the new. You need something. You got to take the best of what's there and make them some kind of temporary police. That's what we did. Then we started the police academy, and some of the best guys who were in the transitional force could turn over. But again, vetting and what you said, Dr. Johnson, you really have to. In Jamaica, we started doing polygraph tests on all the incoming police cadets to the academy. And the first year we did it, we lost 50% of our applicants because of gang affiliation, drug use, or prior criminal activity, gang membership, for instance. But you know what? That next class was pretty good. So bringing the best techniques we have from the United States to our overseas programs. But like I said, in many cases, we don't start from scratch. We're trying to create specialties within different, like with the Colombian National Police, they didn't have a narcotics police. We had tried to use the army, but the corruption was out of hand. We tried to use the what we call the Fiscalia, the prosecutor's offices, but prosecutors had a hard time jumping out of helicopters. We tried the customs police, and they were more. So we created the anti-narcotics police, and leaders. We picked some incredible leaders to lead that narcotics police, and they ended Pablo Escobar's reign. They ended the Cali cartel's reign. It got to the point when the FARC took over the drug trade, the police were outgunned, and we had to shift over to the armed forces, where human rights was a key component of our training, by the way. Human rights is absolutely crucial. So every situation is different. And in the United States, it's a totally different situation than that. But again, I go back, and I hate to sound like a broken record, but standardized training that can be somehow federally certified, that is standard for the entire country, needs to be implemented. And that'll take years. That's a Marshall type plan. But leadership is key.
Yes, and I'm sorry, I just want to jump in. You talk about training, and not just academy training. You're talking about just in service. You're talking about supplemental training, just training. You're right. Train them for the job we want them to do. We can't give them a little academy and then 40 hours a week where they watch videos for 20 hours a week and they just go shoot on the range and qualify and think that that's real good training. We need real rigorous training for the job of 21st century police. I hardly agree.
Well, one last point on.
Wait. Let me. Okay, go ahead, Luis. Sure.
Well, one last point on the militarization aspect. There's a program called Excess Defense Articles, where over the past few years, because of the kind of scaling down of operations in Iraq and Afghanistan, we've had an incredible amount of MRAPs, all sorts of fighting vehicles, sniper rifles, all sorts of tactical stuff. And police departments it was like a grab bag thing. Matter of fact, for us in Jamaica, we wanted to grab some of that stuff for the Jamaican armed forces and all, but no, because the Chicago Police Department got all the, so we really had to de-emphasize all this military type stuff. South Korea had tremendous success in crowd control because they stopped dressing their guys up with all that fancy stuff, and they went out with minimum stuff on their uniform, and that seemed to de-escalate the situation. So I think the militarization of our police has been a very negative factor.
Okay, we're getting questions in from the audience. So, before we do that, it sure seems to me that our police spend, and I'm saying this without any data, so please correct me if I'm wrong, that our police spend an awful lot of time dealing with social issues, yes, with homeless people with mental issues, with drug abuse issues, alcoholism, domestic disputes. And I was telling Thaddeus, saw something on Reddit where somebody said, that a counter clerk at a Waffle House is better at de-escalating problems than the LAPD is. We train the police to do one thing, and then we send them out to do something that is unrelated to that. I mean, how do we deal with that? I mean, what would be the ideal response to societal problems that we've given to the police?
Let me say this, and this is part of the thing we heard in the defunding conversation is let's reallocate money. But tell me this, if you want to bring a social worker on the scene, somebody needs to secure their scene. Are they going on by themselves? Are we going to deputize them? Are they going to be armed? I mean, a lot of times paramedics won't even enter scenes until we secure it. And so
Sure.
If we wanted to, so sure, police department should maybe partner with, but think about it. Most police agencies, we run what, 3 to 4 shifts every day, 24 hours a day, right? And if you wanted to house, let's say, a social worker, you would need at least 4 or 5 social workers per precinct or per zone. And that gets
so the problems don't happen during work hours.
Exactly, or you can't predict when it's going to happen. And so police officers should be partnering with academia, should be partnering with other social services to where these social services are embedded within these departments and with police departments. And we make these things together, where arrest is not the first thing we're going to do when we get to a child abuse case, or the first thing we do when we get to a domestic violence case or someone's going through a mental crisis. Police officer comes, secure the scene, and we bring another source in, someone who's trained to be a counselor, someone who's better trained at de-escalation and do this all the time. That's possibly a first step, but again, that's not going to be cheap or free.
Right. Okay, I've got a question here from Guy Powell. It says, with 900,000 police officers in the US and hundreds of millions of interactions with citizens every year, is it reasonable to expect 100% perfect interaction? I mean, you certainly, whether, you don't expect that of clerks at Walmart. You don't expect that Amazon's going to ship the right package nearby. Is it right to expect that police are going to make no errors?
No, of course not. But what we're seeing is time and time again. You know what's revolutionized the last few years is these cell phones that people have in their pockets, because this kind of stuff has been going on forever, and it's only now that people are recording it, putting on the internet, that we're seeing it. No, you can't expect 100,000 people to do this, but you have to expect better than what's going on now. And that's why we mentioned community policemen. You're working with your neighbors. It also would help sometimes if you had police officers who spoke the language of their community. I know in parts of Spanish-speaking DC, you often hear a cry out, do we have any Spanish speakers available? We need Spanish speakers on the scene, et cetera, et cetera. But you shouldn't have to search for them. You should have them. So no, you can't have perfection, but I'll let Thaddeus, talk about the specifics on it. But no one's going to bat 1,000%, but you're dealing with your neighbors and your fellow citizens, and we should expect better.
I wholeheartedly agree. I think, and this may be conservative, I think police have over 25 million to 30 million contacts with citizens. When you look at police shootings, they're roughly around 1,000. Now, I'm not trying to minimize it at all, but let's look at the numbers. That's pretty successful when you look at it. The problem is the disparities, right? If I'm a white American, sure, it's fine to get it right. But if every face I see or the faces that's being arrested or where police are deployed at, that's problematic. And so that's why we can't expect them to get it right. That's the problem with it. It's the one job we don't afford police officers any room for error, and that's not right, particularly with the resources and training that they have. So we need to have early intervention systems. We need to have red flag systems. We should be trying to get rid of officers who may have been in a scuffle. We need to try to save that, reinvest, realign, and remotivate them into the right direction. But it's not fair to ask them to get it right all the time, but if you put the uniform on, you know what you're getting into. And if it's too hot in the kitchen, well, you know how the saying goes, right? And we really need officers to understand their position in society, and that the society has their back, and that we're going to keep saying pay, but we're going to invest in them and the resources and equipment that they need. The money's there, and we don't have to take it out of policing. The federal government from 1990 to 2017 for militarization of police, they invested over $5 billion in police departments over those years. How much government waste and things do we have? Just last year in 2019, the federal government, $52 billion in waste, not to mention healthcare and these things. We have the money there that we can reallocate into these services so we can partner with police, but there's no way possible they can get everything right. But we can demand that they do better.
Dr. Jenny Ward Robinson, who's a dear friend of mine at Georgia State University, is asked, is there a role for the university as a community partner and as an honest broker to foster honest change. So I'm going to ask you, Thaddeus, as the academician on the panel, what's the role of the university?
You have to do better. You have to take the lead. Look, we research this stuff all day behind our desks and our computers. What good is that doing police departments? What good is that doing the public? We should be in the academies. We should be providing supplemental training. We should be having officers on campus training. We should be in there providing them with implicit bias training regularly, because 1 4-hour course block is not going to change a lifelong life learned about racism and implicit biases, right? The university has to take the lead, provide training. We have the evidence. We don't know if they work in real life, but this is an opportunity to find out. So the universities have to step up. We have to partner with these agencies, and we can't be partnering because we want to get research and data. We have to partner because we want to actually make a change with policing in our society. We have to get ahead of it. We just have to. We have to do better as academics. We can't sit on the sidelines. We have to do better and take our resources that we have and invest not only in the police, but these communities. Let's get off in front of these computers and let's get to action.
You know, universities are a great source of recruiting, Charles. You know that we in the Foreign Service, we have diplomats and residents at many what have been traditionally minority schools, trying to recruit, make the Foreign Service more diverse. And why don't we do that for local police forces, to have recruitments to go speak with minority students, say, be part of the community, help your community, and do reach out and do some of those things to try to make your police forces more diverse.
And let me pull up Georgia State. Leadership. Luis talked about leadership. Georgia State, the Criminal Justice Department has an MIS program and a leadership program where we train leaders or burgeoning leaders with ethics, strategy, these understanding optics. Like, this is what the university has to do: recruit, train leaders. You're so right, Luis.
That's great. Luis, question for you from Wally Yazbak. Why do we have to train police why are we training foreign police? Why is the U.S. doing that?
Well, because it's in our interest to have stability with our allies, to make sure that our allies are complying with human rights. And in case in South America, we did it because of the drug trade, because that's where the drug producing areas are that are shipping massive amounts of drugs to the United States. In Haiti, it was to stabilize Haiti and to replace the tremendous abuses that were going on with the military. And in Iraq, well, it's basically, we were kind of starting from zero as well. So it's certainly in our interest, because we want to stop trade of drugs and arms and contraband and human trafficking coming to our country. We like to see stability. That's good for us and good for the world. And in some places we have to start from scratch, and we want to have a viable security force that will help the people and establish infrastructure and so on.
Chris Shaw, who's a former intern at the World Affairs Council, now a law student at Emory, asks, given the prevalence of guns in America, is it feasible to have the police use only lasers and to not be armed? Thaddeus, what do you think?
I mean, look, this is the issue. Again, these problems are systemic and run much deeper than police. As long as you have economic gaps, educational gaps, as long as you don't have real solid bipartisan gun control, you will always have a need for armed guardianship in our communities. Police right now are a necessary evil, in quotes, but I don't see a world unless we address those issues that we won't be able to have police who are not armed in our communities. It shouldn't be the first resort. We need to provide them other tools. I mean, you have some departments where all they have officers have in their hands. They may have pepper spray, and then next thing they have is their weapon. Once you pull their weapon out, there's really no going back. And so we provide them with different tools along that force continuum. But we're going to need armed guardianship as long as we have these societal issues.
I'm getting a question. What is GILEE? And I don't know what it is. This is an acronym. So, Mr. Yazbak, if you would, you got to ask the question because I don't know, and doesn't look like either of the panelists know. So, anyhow, the Atlanta City Council budget, this is from Hampton Stall, includes about a 30% of the budget goes to the APD. what message does Atlanta Police Department, what message does it send our community when criminalization takes a third of the budget while community support, fire departments, parks and recreation, et cetera, are all in single digits?
Well, I will say this, when it comes to police budgets, the vast majority of that money goes towards salary and benefits and retirement and pensions. Like, for some reason, we think that police officers departments have all this money to go buy Knight Rider and all these types of NCIS type of equipment. We don't have that. I think with the amount of money that's being spent on policing compared to everything else says less about the department and less about the city. It says about the world that we live in. It says that we want to throw money at police and secure the problem and force police to be those social workers, force police to be those after-school care people. That's what it says about it, that we need to reassess and not take that money away, but what are the police doing with that money? Let's evaluate. Are we using it? Are we being wasteful? Are we just holding money set up for people that we hope join the force when we can take that money, invest in the ones that we have, and afford them the resources and training and tools to actually do the job correctly? So I think it says less about the department and the city. It says much more about the world that we live in and the responsibilities that we put on the back of police officers, that this should be their responsibility in the first place.
If we take as a given that there's systemic racism in our society, how do we deal with that in the police force? I mean, it's logical that our police forces reflect our society, whether you're in the United States or you're in Haiti or you're in Iraq. I mean, how do we deal with that? How do we expect our officers to be better than we are, than the community?
I mean, unless Luis wants to jump in, I'll just kind of jump in. I think that's the problem. Like, we really want to see, I'm not saying we focus on the wrong thing about focusing on police. Racism is accepted in America. We have come to be conditioned that Black communities have work schools, that Black communities don't have access, or minority communities have access to nutritious and healthy food options, that Black and small minority businesses can't get loans. It's economic oppression. Those are the things we have to focus on. Police will be in the catch-22 as long as those things are there. We can provide implicit bias training, right? But this is the thing. The force is this level called reasonable objective reasonableness. That if there's a reasonable fear, well, if racism exists, implicit bias exists, doesn't matter who you put in uniform. What's going to happen is, as long as the Black and brown bodies justify the use of force, that's not going to change. So this is so much deeper than police. Police are just a representation of what the anger is pointed to, because it represents the face of the government. People are angry at the police, but they're also angry at the government as well too. And the police are just in a harsh situation. That's the reality of it.
There's room for optimism. I think that in the last few weeks, I think the worm is turning a little bit, in the sense that most, if you look at the protesters, you look at the involvement, you look at this discussion we're having right here, these discussions would not have been viable a few years ago. I think that most of the American people now are recognizing that indeed there's been an unfair advantage, and that there has been systemic racism throughout all our infrastructure, from the judicial system, penal system, the police, as you mentioned, Dr. Johnson, economically, all these things. I mean, we see it reflected everywhere. And finally, I think it's now kind of mainstream almost to acknowledge these things. And I think that's a great thing that all this has gone mainstream, and hopefully it'll lead to some very solid systemic changes.
Okay, so here's the follow-up question to that, and a number of people have asked this in different forms. How do we talk about police reform without it becoming a partisan issue? It makes sense, listening to you, that whether you're on the right or the left or the center, whether you're apolitical, whether you're in business or in academia, that this is important to all of us. How do we talk about police reform without it being turned into a binary, with one party supporting one response and another party supporting another response?
It seems to be a lot more partisanship now. I mean, we see Romney and others out there walking again. As we said, this has been an awakening. I want to say that Derek Chauvin, he actually exposed our ugly truths, and George Floyd really urged us into our moment of clarity, where our moment of awakening. And so I feel really hopeful that not only the community, but also our leaders on these both sides of the aisle, they're starting to see that this is much bigger than any partisan issue. I think what's happening right now is that the voices that we hear are strong and loud and continuous, and we're not really getting a chance to see the progress that's being made. There's right now bipartisan bills being pushed forth, and I can't remember one, but it's one pushed forth by conservatives, which we tend to think that are more pro-police and than liberals are. But they're showing that they're ready to make a change. They're showing that they understand that these inequities are pervasive even in our laws, in our policies. And so I'm really hopeful. But again, it's not going to happen overnight. We're talking about 400, 500 years of things going on. So these conversations are the first step. The scales being removed from my eyes is the first step. So I am, like Luis, very optimistic, but it's going to take some time. I think what the focus is right now, what can we do in the interim before this generational change has to occur?
Yeah, I think we have to stay away from slogans. That's why I think this whole just straight defund the police, it's not really, it's been taken over as a partisan cry, you know. I think we need to have discussions like we are having right now, but on the community level, this needs to be a talk we're having all over the place. And you're right, Dr. Johnson, the major point, we need some solid results. We need legislation. We need standardized training. We need reform. We need to define, are police unions going to have award in collective bargaining with their municipalities or whatever? Because sometimes the police unions, although at one point very necessary, they seem to have now become really part of the problem. So, I mean, we need to have a national discussion on this. I think this dialogue is beginning, and I think there is room for optimism. But one thing you said is so true. This has to be a continuous sounding of the alarm here. We can't just next week, like we pretend like the coronavirus, it doesn't exist anymore, but we don't talk about it anymore, but it's still there. This is the same thing. We can't forget about this next week. We have to continue putting pressure on our political leaders, and this has to be a national dialogue.
Laura Mitchell has a great question here. She said, what about licensing police officers? I mean, we license beauty parlor operators and accountants and doctors. What if we licensed police officers with educational program, not at the police academy, but training run by Dr. Johnson, or I don't know who. You tell me what's the right way to do that.
I mean,
is that something that would work?
Well, this goes back. Look, this is not something new. I mean, August Farmer in the early 1900s started a school in Berkeley. You know, with training police officers for the advancements of technologies and de-escalation techniques and leadership. I mean, so I'm not sure if, I think partnering with universities help. I'm not sure if you want to go that route, but you can have state commissions that certify police officers as peace officers. What needs to happen, they need to be more transparent, right? Their way of doing things needs to be standardized. I remember the Hurricane Katrina, to just give you a prime example of how far back we are. I had an officer come from Louisiana. He'd already trained the older officer, and we were going to give him a lateral transfer. But guess what? None of the files in Louisiana were digitized. So this flood happened. Guess what? We couldn't find his records. If you go to Tennessee, the state of Tennessee, you'll see the mail started transition, but you have records. So I want my records. They're going to go to a room and say, go in this room and find your file. And boxes and boxes of things. So we have to do better at that level. Standards that we hold for police officers. And again, I'll say this. If you want to license, if you want to increase the standards, you're going to have to pay some more.
Increase the pay.
And maybe even one idea, we want to get different type of people to come to policing. Getting signing bonuses, like armed services. We want a person who has a background in biology and social work, psychology. Let's provide them signing bonuses. Maybe we can just take advantage of the partnerships with universities and get the right people with the right training, with the right resources. And so we don't start doing all this licensing and all that, because that to me can get a little hairy with as decentralized as policing is in America.
Okay, we're going to end in a couple of minutes. Let me just, each of you a question. Can you give a domestic example, and Luis, a foreign example of a police force that's doing it right, that's training its officers correctly, that's been able to avoid the sorts of issues that we've seen so much on TV in the last few weeks? I mean, who's doing it right in the U.S.? Who's doing it right internationally?
I like the Spanish system. The Spanish system has the Spanish National Police, and they're located mainly in the cities, and they have the Guardia Civil that works mainly in the rural or small towns. If you look the way they handle the COVID-19 thing, Spain was devastated by COVID-19. And yet I saw these videos on the internet, and I lived in Spain for 3 years and worked with the police forces there. You had the police would come into a street, get out of their cars, put on music on the loudspeakers and dance and entertain the people, get the people out on the balconies and just get everyone involved. People really took the lockdown seriously. And the Guardia Civil did the same thing in the rural areas. It's not perfect, but I've seen incredible demonstrations in Spain with hundreds of thousands of people, the Pride Parade, for instance, and the crowd control and the coordination and the speaking and the way they set up, and the police speak with the guys who are in the demonstration. They pre-plan the routes, and, you know, have they never used a water cannon on people? Well, of course, over the years, there's going to be an occasion where they use a water cannon or what have you, but, and they've had problems with some of the minority groups there, but nowhere near on the scale we've had, because they emphasize outreach, they emphasize community policing, and they have things very organized, and they have a good tradition of proper policing.
Thaddeus, who's doing it right in the U.S.?
I will say, I would borrow bits and pieces from maybe a handful of departments. I will say that Camden's police department, with a bold move like that and focus on community policing, they got it right. The pay part and the reward structure part, I hadn't heard much about that, but to re-envision what policing should look like, making them and embedding them as part of the community. As far as removing some of the duties from police that maybe can give to someone else, the city of Memphis, we have a program for traffic officers where we have officers right at high school. They handle traffic accidents and things of that sort to kind of alleviate that burden of police for the only incident that you have to the traffic stop. You have places like San Francisco and San Antonio when it came to undocumented immigrants and sex workers that said, report your crimes to us. We don't care in what context it happened. We care about your safety. And so Atlanta Police Department, they've infused a lot of technology in order to try to suppress problems before they even happen, to beef up their investigative services, to take some of the pressure off the actual police officers themselves and use specialized units. I think if having specialized units, technology, community policing, and using internal devices to take off some of the burden and strain the police and allow them to focus on law enforcement, the job we have them for, I think, and Camden, just changing the philosophy, I think we can take ideas from all of those departments and start working toward a more community-centered 21st century.
So what I hear both of y'all saying isn't defund the police, but reboot the police.
Yes.
And we're going to leave it there. I want to thank you both. This has been a terrific program. We're leaving people with more questions that have not been answered. I want to thank all the audience who's been here. If I didn't get a chance to ask your question, I apologize. I want to thank you, Ambassador Luis Moreno and Thaddeus Johnson. Got a little advertisement here. So next week, we've got coming up on Wednesday at noon, Clyde Higgins, who's the president and CEO of the Atlanta Beltline. So it should be a more relaxed conversation. It should be a lot of fun. And then on Thursday, the 18th, we've got Nadia Theodore, the Consul General of Canada. So we got who has reinvented diplomacy here in Atlanta. She has just been and around the Southeast in the country, the states that she covers. She has been terrific, and I hope you're all going to join in as we have a conversation with Nadia. Join the World Affairs Council. That's how we pay our staff. That's how we pay for this program we've got today. That's how we upgraded from one Zoom platform to the next better Zoom platform. We need people to join the World Affairs Council. If you don't live in Georgia and you'd like to become a digital member, we'd be delighted to have you. Come on in. And if you'd like to sponsor one of these programs, please contact me. We'd love for you or your company to sponsor one of our Zoom programs. Great graduation gift for your nephew. You don't know what to give him. We'll give him a program. This will be terrific. And finally, thank you to the World Affairs Council staff, to Fernanda Latina Ishihara, who's our Executive Director, Valerie Lopez DeFrank, who's our Business Manager, and Ladarian Gillette, who is the producer of this and all of our Zoom programs. Thank you all very much, and I'll see you all next week. Have a great weekend. Luis, thank you so much. It's good to see you. Thaddeus, it's been a pleasure working with you, getting to know you. And I look forward to doing another program with you in a year where you tell me all the problems have been solved. So. Great. Thank you very much. This has been very cool. Bye-bye, y'all.